Hi everyone, so the expansion is coming, and last Thursday we had the campfire chat detailing a lot of the changes for all of the classes. There's lots of crazy stuff, new skills, passives, items, and of course the runes are coming. So you can also read up on all that in the 2.0 PTR preview here that is starting on Wednesday. So I'm already preparing builds to jump in, and I also want you guys to try them out or maybe share what you got that you are cooking. But alone for the rogue, I've been working on some stuff last night, and we have like those 5 new planners that I made. So we have a Shadow Step, a Death Trap, a Rain of Arrows, a Dance of Knives, that's the new skill, and an Invigorating Strike planner here that are effectively completely new builds compared to how they worked in the past or what you were able to do with them. And I want to show you a little bit what is possible with the new stuff. And all of this doesn't even include the runes yet. I didn't even do much of the runes that are also going to be in the PTR, at least on the later stage of the PTR. So there's going to be a lot more stuff to try. Keep in mind, these are just kind of like, early versions. So it's going to be a lot of tweaking. Some of them are kind of like, work in progress and kind of like a proof of concept more than anything. But yeah, I'm obviously working on a lot of builds here for the expansion, because these are effectively the expansion builds that we can already test, and that's a pretty huge deal. We have everything on the PTR besides the mercenaries, which I believe are not going to be very impactful anyway, and the Spiritborn. So of course the Spiritborn we can't test just yet, but all the existing classes you can do a lot of stuff. And I already started working on my season 6 planners section here. So if you're on my Discord, I always have my channel with all the builds, and you can kind of bookmark these if you want, or you can go check here. I moved the season 5 stuff up here, so it's still there. If you are still playing the current season, you can find them there. But there's a lot of the builds that I have been working on that I'm planning to play. Lots of cool stuff, and I want to talk about the rogues here. So I will also work on the other classes, but this is just kind of where I got started. There's new skills for all the classes. There's definitely new tools for all the classes to make fancy stuff work. We're gonna see stuff like revamped companion druids, for example, or rabies druid even. And there's like this new familiar for the sorcerers, plus some reworks on some of the aspects. So in general, there's going to be lots of new stuff. And even for the rogue, I'm not done yet. There's going to be a revamped like a grenade rogue now. There's going to be maybe stuff with like smoke grenade, and there's like lots of stuff that you can try out. In general, the build diversity is massively expanding, it seems. And overall, we're going to have a lot of really crazy stuff to choose from, I think. But just to go through this a little bit, what I got so far, which is like kind of the most exciting builds that I've been working on now for the rogue for myself. I just want to give you a bit of an overview of how they work and why they're suddenly so good. So we have the Shadow Step rogue here. So there was some notes about Shadow Step in the patch notes here. And in particular, we have a new temper that says Shadow Step cleaves for X% damage. Now, we don't know how much this cleaves for, but the expectation is that this is not trivial, at least, so that you can put this on like absolute 3 different items, and then similar to the bash cleave, you can probably, hit for whatever the Shadow Step does, and then have the AoE maybe at roughly the similar value or so. And Shadow Step Rogue was already a concept that was worked on since season 4, back then with Victimize, which now has been changed to not really function that way anymore. It has a different purpose now. That is also something I want to work on. But the Shadow Step Cleave I expect to be very powerful, and it gives Shadow Step some much needed AoE. Previously, the idea was Shadow Step would do that for Victimize, but now this doesn't work anymore. So instead, we get this temper. And Shadow Step didn't really have any weapon temper before, so this seems to me like a massive improvement. And then there's also this here, the Disciplined Shadow Step upgrade now gives Shadow Step 200% extra damage. So this definitely makes for some pretty nasty nukes you can do. And these days you can also get to the point where you have permanent Shadow Step all the time. All you have to do is get your Shadow Step cooldown to around 3.5 seconds or so. So you have to stack a bit of cooldown reduction, but it's quite possible with something like Harlequin Crest. Or there's agility cooldown reduction, there's mobility skill cooldown reduction. So all these things apply to Shadow Step. And you can temper those on like a jewelry, for example, or your boots. And in that case, you easily get down to this 3.5 seconds mark or so, to the point where you can just permanently Shadow Step all the time. And there's some other little things you can do with this. And you get to the point where Shadow Step can actually do a lot of single target damage as well. So this is kind of what I built here. And I'm not going to go through like all of the details here, but it uses cold imbuement. So this is just like a really strong buff. You try to throw one smoke grenade then follow up with a Shadow Step and repeat on bosses, for example, because you have the synergy aspect that gives you the 100% extra damage for your next agility skill when you use a subterfuge skill, which is the smoke. And then the agility skill will give your subterfuge skill a cooldown, so you effectively get to the point where you can throw smoke, do a Shadow Step, throw smoke, do a Shadow Step, and so on. And then you get, like, you know, tons of stagger on the boss, you get this 25% damage buff on the boss, and you also preserve your cold imbuement charges a little bit, because if you just like perma Shadow Step all the time, you might run out of those cold imbuement charges really quickly. So this is also a way to kind of like get more value out of these things. And then for just farming, AoE fights and so on, you just like literally Shadow Step, Shadow Step, Shadow Step, Shadow Step. And then, you know, maybe in between you do a dash, in between you press a cold imbuement, in between you do like one Heart Seeker. I have a Heart Seeker here mostly for the tricks of the trade Paragon board, so you want to use that sometimes, but otherwise it's just like an inner side momentum build. So we try to boost our cutthroat damage as much as possible and then buff our like Shadow Step damage. So this is kind of what I expect here will work pretty well. We're gonna try this and see how this goes, but I expect this to be a very fast build with actually pretty decent boss damage output. Now next we have the Death Trap, so that's kind of an interesting one. So Death Trap Rogue is something that I had on max roll way back when the game launched. It's actually the build that I raced with for the world first hardcore level 100 back in season 0. And it kind of worked a bit different. It was like a Twisting Blades build with Death Trap stuff in there, with exposure and so on. But these days, there is actually a possibility to play a real Death Trap Rogue. Like, Death Trap is like everything in that setup. So this is done with the Eyes in the Dark, which gives Death Trap a massive damage multiplier and allows it to cast twice effectively. And then there's also like a Death Trap temper they've added. So they just added tempers for everything. There's also this effect here that they added, which is really huge. So it now says on Supreme Death Trap, one of the upgrades, enemies that resist Death Trap's pull are hit again for 120% of Death Trap damage. So we have to see if this also works for example, Unstoppable Elites. It might, which might be pretty crazy. But more importantly, it gives you a lot of boss damage. Bosses cannot be pulled. They are generally just immune to knockback or any crowd control until you stagger them. And then, so you can actually do massive damage on bosses. In fact, someone has shown me a Death Trap Rogue that kind of works with the concept of just casting Death Trap all the time to deal damage. And they were actually able to do tier 7 hordes in season 5 very comfortably, and even tier 8 hordes as far as I've heard. Maybe not like top meta level, but with buffs like these, there is certainly a huge improvement on such a setup. So I'm very excited to try this out. And there's also, for example, this tempering now. Chance to deal double damage. So if you can get this to, let's say, close to 100%, or maybe even 100% if you temper this 3 times, and then you get double damage from this, you get like roughly double damage from the other effect you just saw. That's like quadruple already. And then there's like a bunch of other small stuff. There's like a new passive coming for the rogues that gives you 15% ultimate skill damage per point. So you can get at least 3 points of that, maybe more if you have the option to rolls on your neck, for example, or you use the new mythic chest that gives you +1 to all passives. So pretty crazy stuff. And I expect this to be pretty strong, so we'll see. But now also another thing is that you can put points into your ultimate skills. So instead of only 1 point, you can now just regular skills have 5 points in them, and those 5 points give you extra damage and extra cooldown. So this works a bit like, for example, teleport on the Sorg, where if you invest more points, you get a shorter cooldown, and I expect it's gonna follow the same formula. So you can get to the point where your base cooldown is actually much lower than what it says here. 50 seconds can be reduced down to, for example, 36 seconds if you have 9 points in Death Trap, which you can achieve from 5 points here, and then, for example, Harlequin Crest. And the good thing about this base cooldown reduction is that this works in addition to cooldown reduction that you can get from like items or from like the Harlequin cooldown roll, for example. And we get to the point where your base cooldown is less than 40 seconds, which means for rogues, you can then get 75% cooldown reduction, like as a percent stat to your around 40 seconds base cooldown skill, meaning you have a 10 seconds or less cooldown left. And if you have 10 seconds or less cooldown left, then you can use preparation to instantly reset your ultimate, because as long as you spend 150 energy, we'll get 2 preparation procs, you get minus 10 seconds off flat on your cooldown. And this means that, well, if it's 10 seconds, you get minus 10, boom, instant reset. And this is doable with the Beastfall boots. This is already a tech that we have in, for example, the Season 5 Rain of Arrows Rogue. You will also see this again in the Season 6 Rain of Arrows Rogue. Basically the same story. With the Beastfall Boots, you are able to fill up your resources instantly from Aftermath. That gives you, for example, here 150 energy when you cast your ultimate. Then you use one core skill and you spend 150 energy thanks to this, and then you instantly reset your death trap. So the idea behind this is that you get your buffs up, you throw a smoke, you put a poison trap, but then it's just all about you press ultimate, you press flurry, ultimate, flurry, ultimate, flurry, and so on. So this is kind of the combo behind this whole build, and we don't even need to run something like exposure. I was actually starting this setup with exposure and then barrage, similar to like Andaria's barrage right now, just stack a lot of lucky hits. But the idea behind this was just kind of like unnecessary. Instead, I went with momentum, and momentum also gives us this damage reduction, the movement speed, energy. Yeah, it's kind of nice, and of course 50% extra damage. So this dude up here is wrong. This is 50%. But either way, very strong key passive, whereas exposure doesn't really help us with much. It throws these stun grenades, but otherwise it just gives us cooldown reduction. But we don't really need it, because we just do this combo, we instant reset our death trap, and boom. Now, of course, we do have to invest quite a bit here in order to even get to that point. You do need a really good Harlequin crest. You need like trap cooldown tempers. You want to get to the point where your death trap is effectively around 10 seconds cooldown left, so that you get this instant reset from 2 preparation procs when you spend 150 energy. But otherwise, I'm very excited to try this. I think it's going to be a very powerful setup, and this doesn't include like runes that I can put in there. So yeah, overall it's going to look pretty crazy, I think, and this is kind of the concept behind it. And then you see here there's a Paragon board, so we have like only 5 boards these days. Actually, I didn't really go through this in the Shadow Step setup, but yeah, here is also the new Paragon board that we don't have in the planner just yet. So there's also like, you know, some missing Paragon stuff in some cases. We don't know how many points we're going to have exactly, but I just kind of picked up the most important things here. So there's going to be the same for all of these setups here. We're going to see how exactly we're going to acquire Paragon points, how long it will take to get to 300 points, and so on. There's certainly some exploration here. But TLDR, you pick 5 boards, you put the 5 best glyphs, you pick all of the legendary nodes, and then you just try to get like rare nodes that are kind of decent as soon as possible. But yeah, this is how the Death Trap Rogue works, and I'm very excited to see this. I love Death Trap, and I think it's going to be very good. Now let's talk about Rain of Arrows. Looks kind of similar. This is kind of like a traditional poison Word of Arcane Rain of Arrows setup that I made here. But this is going to use a new key passive that we don't have just yet, but we have this here somewhere. So this is the Alchemical Admixture, which is very powerful. So this buffs your imbuements, and buffing your imbuements especially improves your poison damage, but it also buffs stuff like, for example, the shadow explosions when you do AoE combat, and it also buffs stuff like the extra damage that you deal to crowd controlled enemies when you have cold imbuement, or the extra damage you deal with non-physical damage from the shadow imbuement. So stacking this imbuement effect is extremely powerful, and Rain of Arrows already does that really well thanks to the Prime Rain of Arrows. And then you have like all of the imbuements at once from the Word of Arcane, and then you have stuff like the corruption aspect that gives you extra imbuement potency, and stuff is going to get really wild with this, I think. We use the same concept that I just described for the Death Trap Rogue with the Beastfall Boots and Preparation. Both of these skills have the same base cooldown, so you kind of do exactly the same. You go for roughly 40 seconds base cooldown with extra ranks. So again, you can do some Harlequin and just some investing. Maybe you don't even need Harlequin necessarily, because Word of Arcane actually has this insane Rain of Arrows cooldown roll here that you can also invest into to just straight up go to the 75% cap. But it is very easy to just go Harlequin, also gives you defense and so on. Kind of nice item, and it just helps us out in general, but it is actually unnecessary. If there is any way to get a few extra ultimate cooldown ultimate skill ranks, which I guess we will be able to roll somewhere on our gear, I'm not sure which piece yet, then you can also get to the point where you have this 40 seconds Rain of Arrows cooldown just from investing the points, and then you have 75% from Word of Arcane and you don't need anything else. So this is also an option. We'll see exactly how this will look, but for now this is kind of the combo that I made here: Tyrael, Harlequin, and then Word of Arcane, and then same story, Preparation. We use a Rapid Fire here. I guess it doesn't really matter, but you can actually get a bit of resources back here, so that's mostly why I have this. But you could also use one of the other skills if you wanted. Doesn't really matter, because similar to what we had on the Death Trap Rogue, you press the Rain of Arrows, you get full resources just from doing that with Aftermath, and then you press whatever core skill you want, and like this you can instantly reset your rain of arrows. And you're just gonna stand there, rain of arrows, rapid fire, rain of arrows, rapid fire. It's gonna be crazy. In the past, there was always this like at least 2.5 seconds gap, because this was the maximum amount of cooldown reduction you could gain. And you always had to like press other stuff and you know, like press all the other cooldowns so that you get extra resources from Beast Fall boots, for example, and using a cooldown restores 3 energy here, for example. But now with Aftermath ranks, you can actually get to the point where you don't really have to do this, and you literally just like spam rain of arrows. It's gonna be wild. And every time you press rain of arrows, there's gonna be 4 waves, because you have 2 by default, and then you get the double cast, so you get 4 waves, and they're gonna decimate, and they're gonna poison up enemies like crazy with this insane poison imbuement ranks, plus the imbuement potency we're gonna get from the key passive and stuff like corruption aspect. So this is what it looks like. So there's also the Paragon board here. Again, we're going for the new Paragon board, so the idea is also that maybe you throw in a dash, for example. So here it's gonna go like the new Paragon board, and that one says that when you use a subterfuge or agility skill, you get 50% extra damage for your next cast. So in this case, you do like rain of arrows, like for example, like a boss nuke or so, where you really need the damage. You do like rain of arrows, and then rapid fire, and then you either do a dash or you do smoke grenade, so you get like, you know, some of those buffs that you can get from those skills, like the extra crit, or you want to reposition, or here get a 25% damage. And like this, you have insane damage output, and you just have to press like 1 or 2 skills in between. So it sounds very fun. We actually have like a real rain of arrows rogue that can really focus on this and doesn't always have to like complement it in some way with core skill that also deals some damage. For example, in the past I used to play this with rapid fire, and I had, for example, the Scoundrel's Kiss ring in there, and I actually invested into rapid fire in order to also deal some damage with that skill whenever I had downtime. But it just seems unnecessary at this point. You can just literally cast rain of arrows whenever you want. So it's gonna be pretty wild. Very excited to see this. I think it's gonna be pretty decent as well. And especially when they nerf boss HP, a build like this that has this insane AoE damage output will certainly profit more than other setups. So I think it should be very strong. Now we have Dance of Knives here, a new build, a new skill that's coming. So that's like the next new setup that we have here. We have this here, this is the skill. So it's a channeled agility skill. Basically a little bit like Strafe from the Demon Hunter in Diablo 3. It's going to be like kind of the God Demon Hunter playstyle. We have to see exactly how the charge system works with this, because it has like a 6 charges limit, and then charge cooldown of 1 second, and then every second you channel this, you lose 1 charge. Right now I expect that you actually don't gain charges while channeling, else it will just be permanent anyway, and this enhanced Dance of Knives effects will be kind of pointless. So the idea, I think, is that you stack a lot of movement speed and can make pretty long channels, but at some point you will run out of charges, and we'll see exactly how this will go. But for now, I invested a little bit into like cooldown reduction. Again, similar to what I described with the Shadow Step rogue, you could also go for stuff like agility or mobility skill cooldown reduction tempers. This is an option, because this build doesn't actually need any resources, for example, and it may not even need stuff like imbuement, count, tempers, for example. So I didn't put them here, and instead I actually have exactly this here. We have mobility cooldown reduction, agility cooldown reduction, and so on. We'll see how this will interact with cold imbuement, if this actually bends it like once a second, or if like the entire channel, as long as you hold it down, will actually be cold imbued, for example, and you don't have to invest into this at all. So this is kind of like the concept here. We'll see how this will go. We also have stuff like synergy aspect. Again, we'll have to see if this, for example, snapshots this 100% extra damage for your next agility skill, or the entire channel, like if you channel for 10 seconds and you just have double damage after using a subterfuge skill. So again, you do, like, for example, throw a smoke grenade and then you start channeling. I put inner sight here just to get extra crit, and then also the true sight aspect that is getting buffed. It gives you like a damage buff now while inner sight is active. Even though we don't care about resources, I didn't really want to use combo points. We do have a Heartseeker here, but this is mostly just to get the Tricks or the Trade buff. So basically every 8 seconds you want to shoot 1 Heartseeker, get this buff here. This buffs your cutthroat skills, and then we're going to invest into this new agility skill. So it's going to be somewhere here. I have a few points unspent, and then, you know, we don't have it in the planner yet, but here just the empty skill slot is this Dance of Knives, of course. So that's kind of the idea behind this. We'll see exactly how strong this will be, and, you know, how viable, and of course like some of those unknown mechanics that I just talked about with the cold imbue and the charges. We'll see. There will certainly be tweaks to this, I think, because there's just, yeah, we don't know how exactly it will go, but there's a lot of like really good synergies you can pick up here. Impetus, for example, is one of those. There's also something that I should have mentioned in the Shadow Step liner. You actually have this extra agility skill damage permanently. So you just never really spend this buff, and it's actually pretty powerful. You can even put this on your amulet, for example. And there's a bunch of other like stuff that is changing here. But in the end, there's just like a crit build with Cold Imbue. You try to get your Heartseeker buff. I think tempered like Heartseeker duration. So for example, on bosses, you'll also be able to benefit from this extra crit and extra attack speed and so on. But just casting around one Heartseeker every, 8 seconds or so roughly. So that's kind of the idea here. And I think this could be pretty solid. But again, we have not seen the skill. It looked pretty cool, especially like speed farming wise. I'm very excited to see what we can do with this. And yeah, we'll see how strong the AoE clear is. There's also an aspect for it that helps a lot with the AoE clear. Maybe you can also do something like a shadow imbued version of this for like, something like hell type farming. Or just like to have better AoE clear and maybe then swap to cold for the boss nukes. So you could even do a combo here because, yeah, something like the Heartseeker is pretty optional. For example, we don't have to go for this. And then maybe you can actually have like, one cold and one shadow imbue here, and then have like a bit of AoE clear from the shadow, and then a bit of like boss damage or elite damage from the cold. So it's gonna be kind of interesting to see what we'll do with this here. There's certainly some options to tweak this setup because you don't really need many skills on your bar, honestly. Like, yeah, the smoke grenade is nice to get this damage buff and you get the synergy, for example. But if, for example, the snapshot doesn't work, then this becomes pretty optional, I would say. And we could even throw in like an ultimate here, or you can throw in the imbuements. You can throw in like a caltrops to like just, put them down on the boss, and then you just start like channeling around them with your Dance of Knives. So lots of interesting stuff you can try out here. Or you could even place with combo points. There's also a combo point effect that has this aspect here. So Dance of Knives can now increase channel duration based on combo points spent. So this sounds like you're gonna just get more combo points, or like a longer duration, or maybe you're just gonna spend the charges less frequently. I don't know exactly. And it also gives us AoE effect here. So yeah, this is kind of like a concept here for now, and we'll see how this will go. Definitely waiting for the unique item that goes with this build that says something like, you now shoot basic skills automatically while channeling Dance of Knives. But I guess not just yet. But maybe at some point in the future something like that is going to happen. And finally, we have the Invigorating Strike rogue here. So it's the last new setup that I want to preview in this video. This is also going to be quite interesting. It works a little like the Bash Barb, I guess, because there's this new temper here, the Invigorating Strike cleaves, similar to the Shadow Step. We already have, another case of this here. And I do expect that this is going to be really powerful as well. There is a lot of synergies on the rogue that you can stack to buff this. For example, we have Cold Clip to always get the Cold Imbue here. So whenever you attack crowd-controlled enemies or even frozen enemies, then you can get this massive damage buff here. This is something that, for example, Heartseeker rogues already use. In general, this is going to work pretty similar to Heartseeker rogue, just as a melee version. So instead of shooting you with a bow, now you use your Invigorating Strike in melee, and you're going to have a lot of the same synergies as the current Heartseeker rogue, which is actually an S tier build in Season 5. It has a lot of damage output. I've done tier 8 hordes with that, no problem on hardcore. It is pretty crazy, and I expect that something like this here is also going to be very powerful, depending on how strong this cleave temper is. We can use Momentum again, which is very powerful. You can use Stolen Vigor, Cold Clip, and then you have stuff like Adaptability and Moonrise to buff our basic skill damage. And then we have stuff like Pain Gorges even. So you can, for example, throw down a Poison Trap that just continuously activates Pain Gorges on a lot of enemies. You can also throw in a Death Trap there sometimes. And then you just like whack away with Invigorating Strike. It's kind of interesting because Invigorating Strike was never really useful for anything in the past. And now we actually have a build around it. So I'm really excited to see how strong this will be. There were builds that used Blade Shift in the past. Puncture, of course, is like the #1 basic skill. There is like Heartseeker. And then, yeah, Phosphor Arrow is kind of like down in the gutter for now, I guess. Invigorating Strike build is going to be a thing, I guess. And if you get more points, you can also fill out more of these passives here. So Sturdy Siphoning is obviously going to be very nice. And then it's like a few new passives that are going to be useful. But yeah, overall, pretty straightforward builds. It's kind of like left-click enemies to death. We have Preparation and Shard of Irathiel, so we spent a lot of resources giving us the Preparation procs because we attack very fast with it in Invigorating Strike and all these attack speed bonuses that we can have. And then we get Preparation procs just by spending resources with Shard of Irathiel. And then you can use Death Trap, similar to the Season 5 builds, for example, Andariel Rogue or the Heartseeker Rogue. We want to try to get an ultimate cast every 10 seconds. This gives us this 15% damage reduction from Preparation, and this gives us this up to 45% damage bonus from no witnesses, and then everything else is kind of like, okay, throw the death trap down here, or a poison trap down here, throw a smoke grenade here. So this is kind of optional, you don't have to go for this. You could also go with caltrops if you want, or something like that, but there's not really too much else to pick up here since they don't go for a core skill. And yeah, the rest is just like, okay, we go for Umbers for the Dark Shrouds, and then Counter Nameless. Could also go for another helm. We could, for example, go Shaco, and then for the new Mythic chest is also pretty powerful. We don't have to go for Kal, and then Starless Skies to make the resources work. Now, about the resources, it will be kind of difficult to make energy recovery work well enough to like permanently spam Invigorating Strike, and the setup is built in a way that you don't really have anything else to do when you don't have any energy. So Starless Skies is going to be pretty important for this, much more than for Heartseeker. Heartseeker has the added advantage that you have a lot of lucky hit on this. You have lucky hit here, also relatively high on Invigorating Strike, but Heartseeker has effectively double the amount of lucky hit because of this ricochet. So it's way easier to sustain resources from effects like Innovation on Heartseeker Rogue. So if you have played this before, then you will definitely have to invest more into resources in this Invigorating Strike build. That being said though, we do have Momentum that gives us energy regen. We do have Invigorating Strike that gives us extra energy regen. So you can also lean into regeneration a little bit, especially before you get Starless Skies Ring, maybe. On the PTR, this will not be a problem because you're going to have all the items there from the boost. But at least for like the late game version, I guess this might be kind of a requirement to get to the point where you actually have enough energy. But I will try to tweak this, and maybe we can make a non-mythic version of this as well, and we'll see. But for now, this is kind of the concept here. As I said, similar to Heartseeker Rogue from Season 5. And we'll see what exactly we'll do and tweak it. So these are the 5 builds I wanted to preview for the Rogue. I'm very excited to try them. There's also stuff with like Grenade Rogue that I mentioned. So I think it's going to be some cool combos around just entering stealth all the time. Similar to how I had Grenade Rogue on Max Roll for Season 4. That was based on the Opportunist aspect where you enter stealth and exit stealth and drop grenades all the time. Now we have this new ring here where when you cast a smoke grenade, you start entering stealth every second. In addition to that, you can also enter stealth by evading through enemies. So you can actually get something like 2 stealth procs per second, giving you 4 grenades every time you enter and 4 grenades every time you exit. So you have tons of really powerful grenades that come out of this combo. So I'm quite excited to see how good this will be, and I do have high hopes for it as well. But for now, I haven't cooked that setup yet. So I'll keep you guys updated with more stuff. For now, this is what I got here. Keep an eye on my Discord channel, as I mentioned. So here I'm going to start putting all those planners. Also for the other classes, I'll be working on builds in the next few days before the PTR goes live. And then starting Wednesday, we're going to try everything with the PTR. It's going to be really fun. So hope you enjoyed this for now. As I mentioned, stay tuned for more and hope you like this. See you guys next time.